This is what happens when you finally choose yourself above all else. These words by Carl Jung are not just a philosophical idea, they are a declaration of inner revolution. Choosing yourself is the boldest act in a world that thrives on your compliance and rewards your silence. Most of us are raised to believe that love is earned through sacrifice and value is proven through service to others. We are trained to shrink ourselves to fit expectations, to chase validation rather than purpose. Over time, we forget what our own voice even sounds like. We begin to live as echoes, reflecting what others want to see in us, becoming mirrors for their comfort. We pursue careers for prestige, relationships for approval, routines for appearances. But deep within, a quiet ache reminds us that we are living someone else's dream. Then comes the crack. Sometimes it shows up as burnout, heartbreak, or sudden loneliness. Other times, it is a single quiet moment where the realization hits, I cannot keep living like this. That moment, though painful, is your invitation to awaken. This is where individuation begins, the sacred, terrifying process of becoming who you were always meant to be. Jung believed that true psychological growth comes when we make the unconscious conscious. It means uncovering the self buried beneath roles, masks, and wounds. The early days of choosing yourself feel less like a victory and more like a funeral. You grieve who you thought you were, who you pretended to be, and who others needed you to remain. Your identity begins to dissolve, and with it, the false comfort of fitting in. But this grief is necessary. It's the fire that clears the old, making space for what is real. You realize that the cost of people-pleasing is your peace, and that existed, honoring your needs without guilt. And even though it shakes you, something deep within you begins to feel right. Yet the world does not clap when you choose yourself. Instead, it questions you, punishes you, calls you selfish or difficult. The people who are most comfortable with your compliance may become the loudest voices of resistance. That is the moment you realize not everyone benefits from your healing. Some people only loved you when you were broken, agreeable, or quiet. As you grow into your authentic self, you outgrow the dynamics that depended on your self-abandonment, but do not retreat. The loneliness you feel is not a sign of wrongness. It is the clearing space for new, aligned connections. As you become more you, your energy will no longer attract the same old stories. You begin calling in truth instead of tolerance. Choosing yourself also means facing your shadow, the parts of you you were told to hide, suppress, or be ashamed of. You realize that your anger had a message, your sadness had a root, your desires were never wrong, they were just never heard. You begin to meet your inner child, the version of you that existed before the world taught you fear. You begin to listen to your intuition, to your body, to your soul's quiet whisper. What once seemed distant or mystical becomes your guiding truth. In this process, your standards rise not out of arrogance, but because your soul can no longer tolerate what it used to. You stop chasing half-hearted love, toxic jobs, or surface-level friendships. You understand that being alone is better than being drained. There is power in this shift. Eyes light up what sets your heart on fire. You stop living out of duty and start living from alignment. You realize how many dreams you buried under obligation. The things you said, maybe one day, to the passions you dismissed as impractical, the paths you abandoned to make others comfortable. Now, those dreams come back to visit, and you say yes. You learn to rest without guilt, to create without perfectionism, to speak without shrinking. You allow yourself to be seen, even if it terrifies you. You allow your truth to breathe, even when it shakes the room. This is what healing begins to look like. People begin to ask what changed. You smile because they think it happened overnight. They don't see the nights you cried, the moments you doubted, the courage it took to choose yourself again and again in silence. But you know, and that's enough. Life begins to feel different. It's not that external things change immediately, but your experience of them does. You become less reactive, more centered. You learn to observe instead of absorb. You no longer chase peace. You carry it. You stop seeing rejection as personal. You start seeing it as redirection. You stop seeing mistakes as failures. You see them as lessons. You stop seeing solitude as emptiness. You see it as sacred space for self-connection. Each day becomes a practice of listening inward, of showing up for yourself, of speaking from the heart. You don't wait for permission anymore. You realize no one else can give you what you can only give yourself, your own acceptance. You begin to trust life again, not because it's always gentle, but because you've built the resilience to meet it. You are no longer afraid of endings because you've witnessed your own rebirth. You understand that loss makes space for clarity. This is the beauty of choosing. Your notices, you bloom for you, and that is the true awakening. When you realize you don't need to be saved, fixed, or validated, you just need to be free. Free to be yourself in a world that has always tried to turn you into someone else. So you keep going, you keep showing up, you keep choosing yourself, not once, not twice, but every single day. Through discomfort, through growth, through joy, you become your own sanctuary. And in that space, you finally meet the real you, the you that was waiting all along. Not perfect, not polished, but powerful, whole, unshaken, worthy. You finally remember what it feels like to live, not just exist. This is what happens when you finally choose yourself above all else. The world doesn't end. When you begin to choose yourself, it does not feel like a beginning. It feels like an ending, not the kind of ending that's soft and quiet, but the kind that burns everything in its path. This is the death of your full self, the version of you that existed only to please others. For years, you lived behind masks, pretending to be okay, pretending to be enough. You learned how to perform, how to say what people wanted to hear, how to fit the mold. But deep inside, your spirit whispered that something wasn't right, and now you listen. Letting go of the false self is not graceful. It is violent and raw. It comes with shaking hands, tear-stained pillows, and moments of unbearable confusion. Because as you walk away from what isn't you, there's a part of you screaming to stay. You grieve your old identity, the one that kept you safe, but also silent. You grieve the relationships built on your ability to shrink yourself, and most painfully, you grieve the time you lost being who you weren't. This is not just personal, it's ancestral. You carry generations of women who couldn't speak, men who couldn't feel. You carry stories of survival disguised as tradition and trauma dressed as loyalty. So when you choose yourself, you're not just healing you. You are breaking cycles, challenging blueprints, and disrupting comfort for truth. You become a rebel in your own lineage, a revolutionary of the soul. And yes, it hurts deeply. There are days where you miss the old you, not because she was free, but because she was familiar. There are days where you want to go back, even if it means betraying. This is where the test begins. Will you go back to being who they want, or will you hold your ground? Will you abandon yourself again to soothe their discomfort, or stay loyal to your soul? Choosing yourself forces everything fake to fall apart. Jobs that drained you collapse. Relationships built on codependence dissolve. Environments that once felt safe begin to feel suffocating, and that's okay, because what's breaking is not your life, it's your illusion. What's falling is not your truth, it's your performance. What's dying is not you, it's who you had to become to survive. You start craving depth over attention, silence over noise, solitude over shallow company. You begin to hear your own thoughts again, not filtered through fear or expectation. You begin to see yourself clearly, and it terrifies you and liberates you all at once. You discover how much of your worth was tied to being needed, how often you confused being chosen with being valued, how you used productivity to prove you deserve rest and perfection to avoid rejection. But now you pause, you reflect, you heal, you learn that worth is not earned, it is remembered. And you start the sacred work of remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Your inner voice grows louder. It no longer whispers, it commands. It says no more pretending, no more pleasing, no more hiding. You honor your boundaries, even when they upset people. You speak your truth, even when your voice shakes. You walk away from what no longer fits, even if it breaks your heart. And still, there is guilt. Because the world taught you to measure your goodness by your sacrifice. Because choosing yourself feels like betrayal when all you've ever known is self-abandonment. But that guilt is a ghost. It is the echo of your old conditioning, not a sign that you're wrong. You breathe through it. You move anyway. You trust your healing more than their comfort. You begin to rebuild, not from pain, but from clarity, not from desperation, but from desire. You create a life that honors your rhythm, your joy, your soul. You stop settling. You stop negotiating with your worth. You stop participating in spaces that require your silence to stay. You realize that you were never too much. You were simply too real for those who preferred the lie. You were never broken, just buried. And now you rise. Slowly you attract different energy, people who value depth, not drama. Opportunities that align with your purpose, not your wounds. You find peace in your own presence. You learn to enjoy your own company without the need to perform. And in that stillness, you reconnect with something ancient and pure, your essence. This is not the end, it is the emergence. From the ashes of who you had to be, rises who you truly are. Not perfect, not polished, but whole. This is what happens when you finally choose yourself. You stop settling for survival and start choosing your soul. You stop chasing love and start becoming it. And the world doesn't always understand, but your soul does, and that is enough. Once the false self has been shed, a new challenge emerges. Who are you now, when you are no longer performing, people-pleasing, or pretending? What's left? This is the part Jung spoke of quietly, but clearly, the conscious construction of your true identity. At first, this space feels like a void. You're no longer who you used to be, but not yet fully who you are becoming. It's like standing in a house you just demolished, rubble all around, silence everywhere. And here lies the temptation to rush, to rebuild fast, to fill the silence, to grasp for something, anything that feels familiar, but your soul whispers, wait, don't build from fear, build from truth. So you slow down, you get curious. You begin to ask real questions, not what should I do, but who am I now that I am free? For the first time, you listen without judgment. You let your desires speak. You let your curiosity guide you. You allow your intuition to lead, not just logic. You remember the passions you buried. You pick up the creative tools you once put down. You let your heart play again, without needing to monetize it or prove its worth. Your new identity isn't based on roles, it's based on alignment. Not on titles or opinions, but on values and integrity. You begin to live in a way that feels right, even if it doesn't always look right to others. The world still tries to pull you back. It asks you to define yourself in boxes, to keep it simple, to return to the expected. But you now know better. You are not a label, a resume, or a brand. You are a soul. And with that knowing, you stop striving. You stop measuring your success by comparison or productivity. Instead, you begin measuring it by peace, by presence, by how deeply you feel alive. You become deliberate. Not everything gets access to you anymore. Not every conversation, job, or connection. You've paid people out, but about protecting what you've rebuilt inside. You are not closed. You are curated. You are not defensive. You are discerning. As you rebuild, you realize something surprising. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. It's not reinvention, it's reclamation. You made peace with your past, not by excusing it, but by understanding its purpose. Every wound taught you something, every loss gave birth to clarity. You stop resenting the lessons that came wrapped in pain. You thank your old self for surviving. You tell her you did what you had to do. And now I will do what I was born to do. You begin to speak differently. Your words carry weight, not because they're loud, but because they're real. You no longer say things to be liked, you say them to be true. You dress differently, not for trends, but for how you feel. You carry yourself differently, not to impress, but because you're grounded. Even your silence changes. It no longer hides fear, it radiates strength. People begin to mirror this shift. The relationships that remain grow deeper, more authentic. You don't need to explain your journey to them, they feel it in your presence. And for those who fall away, you release them with grace. Not everyone was meant to go the full distance with you. Some were chapters, not the whole book. And that's okay, you no longer beg for belonging. You realize that the more you belong to yourself, the less you tolerate conditional love. You're not afraid to walk alone because you know your worth doesn't vanish without company. You redefine success. It's not about status, but about fulfillment. Not about accumulation, but alignment. Not about image, but impact, starting with yourself. You begin to serve from overflow, not obligation. You give without depletion, because your well is now your responsibility. You don't rescue, you inspire, you don't chase, you attract. And perhaps the most beautiful change, you trust yourself now. You trust your timing, your choices, your resilience, your inner voice. This trust is everything. It silences doubt, dissolves fear, and keeps you anchored when the storm returns. Because storms do return, but this time you don't collapse. You rise, you are not the same. You are softer but stronger, quieter but more powerful. Less visible to the world, perhaps, but more visible to yourself. And this is freedom. To live without masks, to love without fear, to lead without control, to wake up and feel like your life belongs to you for the first time and finally. So if you're in the middle of rebuilding, be gentle, be slow, be intentional. It's okay if it's messy. It's okay if it's quiet. What matters is that this time it's real, because this is what happens when you finally choose yourself. You don't just change your life. You become the kind of person